I was suicidally depressed. I wasn't considered safe enough to continue to stay in outpatient treatment. I'd been sleeping on my parents' bedroom floor for 6 months because they didn't trust me to sleep in my own room. Every aspect of my life was dictated by my mental health.
You're listening to the Make Mental Podcast.
What's up, Make Mental listeners? I'm Alyssa Herman, former athlete and founder of Beyond the Athlete. If you are a former athlete too, then you know the hardest part of retiring isn't leaving behind your sport, it's losing your teammates. This is why I created The Locker Room, an online community where former athletes rebuild structure, purpose, and healthy competition, all alongside a new team who truly understands them. Make Mental listeners can join free for 30 days. Just use code MAKEMENTAL at the link below to request your spot on the roster.
Hello again, beautiful people. And today on the Make Mental Podcast, I am really excited to welcome Sadie Sutton to the show. She is the creator and host of the Persisted Podcast, a mental health platform dedicated to honest conversations about resilience, growth, and what it actually looks like to keep going when things get hard. Drawing from her background in psychology and her own lived experience, Sadie has built a space that makes mental health feel more approachable, practical, and honestly human. Through She Persisted, she's helped so many people better understand their minds and feel less alone. And today, we're going to dive into her journey, hopefully pull back the curtains a little bit and see what persistence means to her and how taking care of your mental health fits into all of it. So Sadie, I want to know a little bit more about your platform, why She Persisted is a thing, how it came about, and what it really means to you.
Yeah, I struggled a lot with my mental health in middle and high school. I found myself severely depressed during my 8th grade year. And whether it was that we didn't have TikTok or I was just kind of blinders on when it came to my own experience, I didn't really understand that what I was experiencing was depression. All I knew was that I was incredibly hopeless and sad and isolated in my own experience. I found a lot of aspects of my life changing pretty quickly, whether it was my sleep schedule or like diet and withdrawing from my relationships. And I found myself in a position where I couldn't remember a time where I felt happy or hopeful or seen. It was really a lot of depression and anxiety, and those emotions and experience dictated every aspect of my life. And so I was really lucky that I had parents who advocated for me when I couldn't advocate for myself, and saw the signs when I didn't understand what I was experiencing. And so my mom took me to the pediatrician, and I took the PHQ-9, which is the very standard depression questions you get asked probably at the doctor, or if you've ever gone to any kind of intake appointment for therapy. They're like, do you find yourself feeling down, sad, depressed? Have you lost interest or pleasure in things that you usually enjoy? Are you sleeping more or less? Are you eating more or less? All those kinds of questions. And it was the first time that I'd seen every single thing that I was experiencing for months on end on a list. And I just remember I started sobbing. I was 13 years old, and that was what my life had looked like for months. And I didn't understand that it was a real thing. I didn't understand that others had felt that way. I just thought that was how my brain operated, that this was my baseline, and that this was just how my life looked and how it worked, was that I wasn't capable of feeling happy or hopeful or connected. I was just hopeless and isolated and alone and numb. And so I was at that pediatrician appointment, and the pediatrician looked at me and said, "You're severely depressed." I was really shut down when it came to talking about my mental health. I hadn't talked to my parents at all about what I was experiencing. I hadn't really talked to anyone. And so from that point, I ended up going to a psychiatrist appointment where I continued to kind of just emotionally shut down and not talk to anyone about what I was experiencing. And from there, I ended up being hospitalized for the first time. I was 13. It was halfway through 8th grade. And I spent 7 days in inpatient. And that was really the beginning of my mental health treatment journey. Over the next year, I was hospitalized 3 more times. I did 2 rounds of intensive outpatient. I did 2 rounds of outpatient DBT. I did everything you can imagine, whether it was medication management, family therapy, occupational therapy, learning the skills, phone coaching, everything you can imagine, we tried. And I really didn't see a difference when it came to my mental health. I was going through the motions. There were some skills that worked better than others. I wasn't alone in my experience anymore. I was talking to at least a therapist about it, sometimes friends, occasionally my parents. But things continued to be really dark and depressing and isolating and alone. And so halfway through my freshman year of high school, we'd really exhausted my local mental health treatment options. I was suicidally depressed. I wasn't considered safe enough to continue to stay in outpatient treatment. I'd been sleeping on my parents' bedroom floor for 6 months because they didn't trust me to sleep in my own room. Every aspect of my life was dictated by my mental health. I couldn't make it through a school day without debilitating panic attacks and having to call my mom to come pick me up. I was leaving school early to go to intensive outpatient for hours and try and learn these coping skills that were so important to try and get my mental health back on track. There were so many side effects from medications, and I really had no close relationships at that point. There just wasn't the emotional bandwidth to maintain those in any real way. And so halfway through my freshman year of high school, my parents were given the advice to find a higher level of care, and that was residential treatment. And so they did all the research that you do when you have a teen who's struggling with severe depression and suicidal ideation and self-harm. And they found a residential therapy program outside of Boston called 3 East at McLean Hospital, and they specialized in dialectical behavioral therapy, especially for teenage girls who were struggling with depression and self-harm and suicidal ideation. And so packed up my suitcase. We flew across the country, and I I'm going to do the math. Okay. Sophomore, junior, senior, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. So 8 years ago, next week, I started my time living at a mental hospital, and I was really terrified. I was really overwhelmed. I remember going into that first meeting and all these clinicians who were going to work on my case and try and help support me through this experience were sitting there, and I immediately kicked my parents out of the room. And I was like, they don't need to be here. I don't want to talk about what I'm experiencing in front of them. They just dropped everything and found this program and flown me across the country after exhausting every single mental health resource we had. And I still was like, you guys can sit in the hall. And I remember one of the doctors asked me, do you want to be here? And that was a really easy answer because I did not want to be there. I was told I had to. I was told I was too much of a liability to continue to do outpatient at home. Again, I'd exhausted those resources was the language used. But I didn't want to be there. It was the only option. And I told him that it wouldn't work. I'd done DBT twice through at Stanford. And if it didn't work there, if it didn't work at Stanford, why would it work at Harvard? And I really had no hope in my ability or capacity to recover. I thought, again, that my brain's baseline was just depression and hopelessness. And I had gotten to a point where I'd been so consumed by these mental health struggles and gotten myself in such a hole of maladaptive ways of coping with it and ineffective ways of asking for help. And there really wasn't much of a will to change anything. I didn't see the point. I didn't expect it to make it to my high school graduation. I didn't expect to make it to 18. Why would I try when I've done all these things and they haven't worked? And why would I build this life worth living? Because I don't want to live it. And so they were very nice and said, we understand that that's your lived experience thus far, but we've worked with thousands of girls that are in your exact position, that are struggling with the exact same thing you are. And you can recover and you will recover, but you have to want this. You have to accept help. You have to be vulnerable with us about what you're experiencing and what you're going through. And you've gone through the motions before, and you can do that again. And you might feel better for a couple weeks or a couple months, but you'll go back to where you were before. And the way that they described it was a DBT principle called seeing the wisdom in 3 East, which was that logically you understand, like, they've worked with thousands of girls exactly like me. This treatment is evidence-based and shown to be effective for depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation. These people are the best at what they do. There's no reason why this wouldn't work for me. And the wisdom of, like, do I want this for myself? Can I have enough self-compassion to want a better life for myself? Can I be vulnerable with them and let them in and accept the help they're offering? And that was really hard for me because I had so much despair and self-hatred. I didn't think that I deserved to be happy. I hated being depressed. It ate at every single aspect of my life and was a miserable existence, but I didn't think that I deserved anything better than that. And so I remember trying to get some amount of self-compassion because they were very clear that if you don't do this, this won't work. And I was like, okay, the amount of hope that I can have at this point is that maybe in 50 years, I could feel 1% less bad than I do now. And they're like, that's enough. That's progress. That's technically better than you are today, and we'll take it. And that was really all that I could possibly imagine because things had just been getting worse and worse and more painful. And again, nothing had worked thus far. Why would this be any different? And so I saw the wisdom in giving it a shot, and I spent 14 weeks there. And that was really the turning point when it came to my mental health. I built a foundation of mental health skills that I still pull from today and share on the podcast as much as I can. I built a foundation of a relationship with my parents. I started to work through those core beliefs and understand that I was operating and living my life with the belief that I didn't think I was deserving of love. And we need relationships. We need support. We need to accept love when it's offered for us. It's really hard to not be depressed if that's the way you're living the world. And that's the belief that you live your life by. And so there was all these like really foundational pieces of mental health work that I did at that point. And I saw a real shift. I started to not wake up and immediately feel depressed. I was able to cope through panic attacks and feel like I knew how to navigate them. I learned to ask for help and accept help when it was given. I went through the whole process of like medication management and stabilizing that because that's a big piece of the puzzle as well. And at the end of that, I'd had these amazing 14 weeks under my belt, but I had years of struggling and coping with this in a really effective way. And so I ended up spending another 14 months at a therapeutic boarding school to try and maintain that progress. And I've talked about it on the podcast before. It was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. It was a program in the troubled teen industry, and they've since settled a lawsuit for child abuse that thankfully I was not involved in. It was after I was there. But it was really a unique experience because I had one end of the spectrum, which was the absolute best of the best, compassionate, competent mental health care. And the other side, which is the troubled teen industry, which is extremely unregulated and non-evidence-based. And so that was a unique experience to navigate, but I really pulled from this major protective factor, which was all these skills I'd learned and the relationship I'd built with my parents, and kept chugging along and maintaining that progress and catching up on the schoolwork that I'd missed because I'd taken a semester off, and getting ready to go back home and start normal public high school like any other junior would. And a year and a half into that intensive treatment experience, I remember looking around and realizing like, wow, what everyone said would happen that I did not believe ever happened, which is that I am living my life worth living. I'm not depressed. I'm not anxious. I have people around me that help me feel seen and heard and understood, and I'm hopeful and I look towards the future, and I did it. And I think as a teen, it can be really hard to identify with adults that tell you it will get better because you're like, you have so much more power over your life. You don't understand that like I don't have any control over anything, and this is the only way I've ever felt. And so having made such a 180 as a teen, and also understanding that I was so lucky to have access to the care that I did, and most teens didn't need that. There was so much that could have been done to prevent the level of struggle and suffering that I went through. And so I felt so compelled to share my experience and try and let others know that they're not alone, and what did I wish I'd done differently along the way, and what did I learn from all the amazing resources I had access to in intensive treatment. And I thought back to my time at McLean, and during that first intake meeting where they asked me if I wanted to be there, my dad had also asked him if I could have a podcast microphone because he was like, Sadie, think about how many teenage girls out there struggle with depression and anxiety, and you are about to go on such a transformative experience. Think about how much hope this will give people. Like, you should document this. And I was like, I hate you. Get out. This is the worst experience of my life. I'm mortified. Of course I can't have a microphone in a mental hospital. That's a HIPAA violation. The doctors were like, absolutely, you may not podcast from our inpatient unit. But I thought back to that because it was a really interesting and unique way of sharing my mental health experience. I didn't really love the idea of like starting a blog. I didn't want to start a YouTube channel. Like none of those things really resonated. But this idea of a podcast where I could share my story and do so anonymously, which I did for the first year without telling really anyone in my real life other than close friends and family about this project I had, and get really good at sharing my story in a way that helped others and helped them feel hopeful and really take these learnings and pieces of information. And so I started the podcast, and then COVID happened. So my junior and senior year were really monopolized by that, as a lot of people's high school experience was. But I continued the podcast, and I really thought, while struggling with my mental health, that I would never be able to work in the mental health field. I thought it would hit too close to home. There's no way I could ever hear anyone talk about their experiences with depression without immediately going back to my own. And after about a year of doing the podcast and realizing it was what I enjoyed spending my time on more than anything else in the world, and that these conversations were what I loved doing and having, and I was fascinated by this topic. And in fact, it didn't bring up all of the stuff I'd gone through. I could pull from these lived experience, but I could also learn about these things independently of that. And so I decided that I wanted to study psychology, and I applied to the University of Pennsylvania, and I ended up going there, and I just graduated this last spring with my undergrad degree in psychology, and continuing to do the podcast and bringing all of this incredible research and information that we have about why we feel the way we do and how we can shift that, and continuing to pair that with lived experience, because it is so much more than just a research paper or an academic finding. There's so much nuance in actually implementing it in your own life as well. And so that's how the podcast was started back in 2019, and 7 years later, we're still going.
Yeah, wow. A lot to take in there. You're so well spoken. I appreciate how well you can articulate your experience. Obviously, 7 years of doing this does help. You get a little bit better at articulating your experience. And
it was really bad at first. It was recorded on
we've
iPod
been there.
Touch.
Don't watch
no
episode
edits.
1 here. Anyone, do not watch episode 1.
I took mine down.
See, I
couldn't be on
can't.
the
I
internet.
can't do that because the person I recorded with is a big reason of why I started. So I have to. It forces me to leave it up. But I appreciate. I can go back and appreciate it. Similarly, how you can go back and appreciate some of your journey, even the bad parts. I wrote down a lot while you were speaking, and I kind of want to jump back to the beginning. As a young teenage girl, to hear no progress, to hear your liability, to hear you've exhausted all your resources, we're aware enough at that age to know what that means. What does that do to your brain as someone who is developing into their own?
I mean, it wasn't wrong. I think there was some part of me that really objectively understood that, and that it was my decisions that got me in that place. But I think it's really challenging because you don't self-harm or feel suicidal for no reason. And you don't continue to do those things unless they're self-reinforcing or being reinforced externally. And so after a lot of therapy, I can understand why I made those choices and why I continued to do those things. And it was really just that I didn't feel. There was two things. The self-harm aspect was really that I didn't feel that others understood the magnitude of pain I was experiencing. It was like this external way of saying, like, how do you not understand that every single day of my life is so consumed and filled by pain and suffering and overwhelm and hopelessness? Like, it's not this invisible thing that's just in my head. Like, this is agony. And that became very reinforcing as a teen, because there's, of course, wow, this was a crisis and conversation, and then blah, 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 blah. And this is why it's really important to work with a professional when you have someone in your life who's struggling with something like an eating disorder or self-harm or like any of these like external things that are really serious and that really do need professional support for. And then the suicidal ideation piece was interesting and hard to undo in therapy because for me, it was a coping mechanism. It was a way to self-soothe, which was that anytime I struggled to have like the lived experience to be like, I felt bad before and it got better. In my brain, as a super depressed 13-year-old, I was like, I've only ever felt this way. Sure, like there's photos of me smiling in childhood, but like for as long as I can remember, this is how my brain worked and this is how I functioned. So why would I believe that my future would look any anything different. And so when I was struggling so much and was in so much pain that I felt like I just could not continue to go on, it was that safety blanket escape hatch, as I called it when I worked through that in therapy, of like, if it gets worse than this and I can't bear it, there's always that backup option. Like, I don't have to, because there wasn't that lived experience to understand that, like, this too shall pass. And I've felt something hard before, and that passed, and I survived through it, and I'm feeling better again. And so those thoughts were really self-reinforcing. They're really self-soothing. You have an intense emotion, you remind yourself that, like, this is painful, but if I don't want to, I don't have to experience this. And then the emotion goes down. And the next time you experience it, it becomes a stronger and stronger habit loop. And so just like positive habits can be reinforced, so can negative ones. And so that was really what was happening there. But I think it also goes back into like the self-concept thing of when I started intensive treatment, that there was just so much self-loathing. Like, I didn't want anything more for myself. Like, I thought I was so undeserving of love, that I deserved to be in pain, that I deserved to be depressed. So like saying you can't continue in our treatment program, oh, well, I've been through 6 of them so far. What's one more? That wasn't as impactful, but it was challenging in the therapeutic boarding school side of things, because you're there for so long. Like, 14 months of high school is a really significant amount of time in the grand scheme of things when you're developing your self-concept and understanding who you are and how you fit into the world. And a lot of that was defined by, am I better enough? Am I good enough from like a mental health perspective to go home and to get to talk to my family and to get to be a normal kid? And that was challenging, definitely, and continues to be something to unlearn and work through, because, and that's why there's no evidence supporting long-term intensive care for adolescents, because we need to be in community. We need to be with our families, because those are the relationships that have such a strong impact on our mental health and also our well-being long-term. And it can be really ineffective and damaging to remove kids from that for extended periods of time. But that was another aspect that I think once I was out of crisis mode, that became more something that was challenging to navigate and work through, and then kind of understand, okay, here's kind of what I internalized while navigating that experience. Here's what I heard, and what I actually want to believe about myself, and what is true and what is not true, and how do I want to move forward.
I don't deserve love. I don't deserve better. I mean, those are strong one-liners for a child, for a 13-year-old to tell themselves. To use your words, the emotional bandwidth, you said you didn't have the emotional bandwidth to see more than that, to feel more than that. You've obviously gone to college, gotten your degree in mental health, some related field. I'm not going to try and guess the letters, because I know it becomes alphabetical soup when you try and guess the different letters that people go to college for mental health. But anyways, can you explain to us what emotional bandwidth is in terms of mental health, and maybe why you just didn't have the capacity to feel more at the time?
So your emotional bandwidth is how much you can feel and carry and process at a given time. And just like anything with mental health, it's helpful to think about it from a physical health perspective, because there's less stigma and people can be more objective.
And you can visualize it.
Yeah,
it's easy
exactly.
when you can visualize it.
Yeah, so if you think about like your cardiovascular health, like your bandwidth there is like, how long can you run on the treadmill for before being like, stop, this is horrible, I can't breathe, I'm done. And so your emotional bandwidth is similar. Like, how much can I afford to feel and hold and cope with at this time? And there's a lot of things that impact that. Like, I know I'm a more sensitive person and I feel things more intensively than maybe someone else. So it's kind of like, how sensitive are you? How intensively do you feel your emotions? Because that's really different. So like, the experiences I had growing up might have been fine for another kid. And for me, like, I developed those belief systems that weren't the greatest. And I had to unlearn them in lots of therapy. So there's that piece of like, how intensively do you feel your emotions? How much do they impact you? There's also other things like Did you have a big argument with a family member earlier today? Do you have a huge test coming up next week? In the back of your mind, are you like processing through the bills you have to pay? All of these things impact how well we can cope with a certain situation. And there's also this other aspect of like the kind of duration of emotions. Most emotions don't last very long, right? Like we feel scared while watching a movie and then it goes away, or we feel like we laugh at a TikTok video and feel joy and then we scroll to the next one. We feel anxious about that test, but after that passes, it goes away. A lot of mental illness and mental health challenges that really interfere with our life, I think, is that duration piece, which is that you never get a chance to get back to like zero. Like your baseline is always like 40 or 50 or 60. Like you're always anxious. You're always depressed. You're always uncertain. You're always alone. And so then if you're like, for me, I was like, well, every day I'm like an 8 or a 9 for how depressed I feel. And every day I'm like at an 8 or a 9 for how anxious I am. And I've already had 2 panic attacks today. And then I also had that argument with my parents because I'm not listening to what they're saying. And I also am missing all the school because I keep leaving early for the panic attacks. Like there's no room left. Like we're at like 170 and you only have 100 and whatever, only have 100%. Like there's no additional capacity to hold space for someone else's emotional challenges, or think about how can I cultivate self-love for myself, or let me plan for the future. And so I think at that point, most emotions that I was experiencing really fell into like that crisis category of they were all consuming and they had like a lot of negative implications when it came to my life. It was really survival mode for a long period of time. So there just wasn't that like capacity to do any of this other work that you do after getting out of crisis mode. Like, what do I want my life to look like? And is that relationship healthy? And are the classes I'm taking aligned with my true sense of purpose? You can't think about any of those things when you're like trying to survive through a panic attack or when you don't expect to be around next year because you're so hopeless and depressed. And so that's kind of what I'm referring to when I talk about emotional bandwidth. But it's something that I keep in mind now and that I plan my daily life around and I plan my future around, which is understanding like, okay, how can I make sure that I'm setting myself up for success and getting all these basic needs met? Like, am I having people in my life that I'm regularly seeing that I don't have to motivate myself? Like, do I see friends at work, or do I take classes with my friends, or do I have time planned where I call my family or I see them on vacation when we get a chance to get together? Is my schedule set in a way that I have a consistent sleep routine? Am I getting enough movement? And am I getting my nutrition needs met? All of these aspects of my life allow me to have more emotional bandwidth to weather whatever storm comes my way, and support others when they're struggling. But I think most of us don't think about that like we have a capacity and that we will hit that capacity and get into crisis. And there's also a lot of things you can do to improve your emotional bandwidth. One thing that they teach in DBT is accumulating positives, like intentionally planning things that you enjoy so that if you have a bad week next week, you've already planned those 3 moments that are going to make you happy. And then the following week, if you have another bad week, you can't say to yourself, I have nothing good going for me and everything sucks, because you've just accumulated those 3 things that you enjoyed and appreciate. So there are good things in your life. And so a lot of things like that, trying to give yourself as many protective factors as possible to improve that bandwidth, whether it's supportive relationships, those basic needs, having things to look forward to in the future, having a sense of purpose and meaning, feeling needed, feeling seen. All of those things are really important.
Yeah, to give another visual for someone who might not have run on a treadmill before. No, I'm kidding. Everyone's seen a treadmill. But your phone can only run on 20% for so long before it shuts off, before you have to plug it back in. You are the same way. You're no different from your phone in that respect. You can only stay awake for X amount of hours in a row before you just fall asleep. It's just the way it is. Where I want to go with this, I think I'm going to take it a little different direction than I thought, which is okay. A lot of our community is athletes. So I'm wondering, as athletes, how can we create more emotional bandwidth for ourselves when our schedule is jam-packed, when our classes are picked for us, when our life revolves around those 3, 4, 5 hours a day that we have to be at our sport. And then I have a follow-up question from there, depending on your response here.
Yeah. I don't like the idea that you should create more emotional bandwidth to be able to support this external thing. Like, I think your life should support good emotional bandwidth. Like, you shouldn't have to like overcompensate to be able to do this thing. I think that your life should continue to like reinforce and refill that emotional bandwidth and keep you in the right direction. Like, I think short term, we all have challenging seasons. Like, you're cramming for midterms, or you have like a race or a competition you're preparing for, or you have a family member who's having a health scare. Like, there are short periods of time where we're in sprint mode, and we need to like put all of our energy and attention towards that thing, and you don't get back to full battery charge. Maybe you replug and only get to 20% each time you charge your battery. But long term, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think your life should be designed in a way that you continue to feel energized and feel reinforced, and that you're like in the right direction. And if you find yourself at the end of the day or at the end of the week or the end of the month, feel like I'm just like continuing to get worse and worse, and if I continue on this trajectory, I'll burn out, or I'll go into crisis, or I'll struggle in a really big way, something in your life isn't working. And you need to adjust that. You don't need to adjust yourself. Like, something in your life is not serving you. And whether that's your relationship, whether that's your routines, whether that's your responsibilities, whether that's your commitments, something is not keeping you on a positive trajectory. And so something in your life should shift to allow you to end up on that positive trajectory. And there are some things in life we can't change. Like, if you're in high school and you're like, oh, I have to be in school for 7 hours a day, and I hate school, and I don't want to go to school for college. So like, I don't know what you mean that like I should design my life around what makes me feel good, because I can't. Like, there are some things that we can't control. But there also are a lot of things that we do have agency over. And that's like the classes we choose to take, and the job offers we accept, and the relationships we engage in, and the people we follow online, and the times we go to sleep, and the food we eat, and the workouts we do. Like, all of these things we have control and we have agency over. And I'm really like fascinated by motivation and behavior and how we as humans operate. And I think that when it comes to mental health, it's really important to be aware of those things. And so understanding that like the most scarce like resource we have is motivation. And if you're relying on motivation to fix your mental health, you will fail, because anything we rely on motivation for tends to not work out long term. Instead, it should be your routines and your habits, and these external things that help keep you in check. You shouldn't be like, I wait to feel motivated before I make a friend. I'll wait to feel motivated until I go to therapy. I'll wait to feel motivated until I go down that career path. And it's never going to happen. Like, put yourself in classes and jobs or whatever where you will make friends and see people that you enjoy engaging with. Set up coffee dates with your friends where you'll study for that midterm, because you're not going to study for it if you're sitting in your bed scrolling on TikTok. Like, what are these external things that you can do to get your mental health needs met and keep you on that positive trajectory? So when it comes to like emotional bandwidth for a sport, I think I am kind of would reflect on, am I on a trajectory where I'm going to burn out at some point? Okay, that's not sustainable. Something has to give, or I will give, and everything falls apart. And that's what I experienced firsthand. Like, I couldn't even be a high school student because I was lacking that foundation of mental health, and that comes first and foremost. Same thing with your physical health. Like, if you are bedridden with a physical illness, it doesn't matter what your classes you're taking, you can't do them. And so I think understanding that like this is not sustainable and something has to change, and then auditing these different areas, like, is it the classes I'm taking, or the people I'm spending time with, or the hobbies I'm engaging in, or my sleep schedule? Is it the team? Like, what are these aspects that are not allowing me to continue to move in a good direction when it comes to mental health? And the other thing is, like I said, like, there will be challenging seasons. That's completely inevitable. And so if you're already struggling and you don't have a lot of buffer room to kind of absorb that storm when it inevitably comes, like that will send you into crisis. And so ideally we design our lives in a way where like, okay, if something unexpected happens, I can cope through that and be okay. Versus like, I hope nothing bad happens because I am barely hanging on by a thread and can't continue at this pace any longer.
Yeah, what's your advice to athletes whose sport now sends them into crisis mode? Because that's a difficult spot to be.
Yeah, I am not the person to ask for this. I'm a NARP. I'm not an athletic regular person.
No, that's okay.
Don't watch
Anyone
a
can
lot.
learn from anyone. Anyone
Well, see,
can learn
because
from
I would
anyone.
say like quit the sport. Like if you're
Yeah,
miserable.
why say that though? Why from your perspective? Again, this is just your perspective. It's not a blanket thrown over and
Yeah.
it helps everybody.
So I think it depends is the answer. So like I took Angela Duckworth's grit class, and one of the exercises that she has you do is understand what your like one true north goal is. Like we all have one, and we could have multiple, but like when it comes to like our career or like our aspirations in that regard, there tends to be one. And like if you have like a family, like maybe you'll have another true north as like a parent, or if you have like, I don't know, you don't have a lot, but they can be in different areas. And so if you have this one true north, which for me, it's helping young people feel a sense of control and understanding when it comes to their mental health. And there are different things I do in service of that. I go to college, I take classes I don't like Spanish, even though it's hard and impossible and I hate studying for it because I have to get that credit filled so I can graduate and get that psychology degree and then apply to grad school so I can do research and understand this better. I do that thing I don't like in service of my larger purpose. And that larger purpose gives me a lot of meaning. It excites me. It energizes me. I love spending my time doing it. I could spend decades doing this thing and still be passionate about it. The podcast. I love having these conversations. I love putting together these episodes and posts. And then there's things that are like kind of in service of it, but not really. I edit other people's social media content to subsidize the podcast and get support there. So understanding and reflecting on like, what is my true north? And if getting a scholarship to college is in service of your true north of becoming a doctor and helping others, okay, you kind of have to go through the motions and make this sustainable short term so you can get to that long-term goal. But if you're like, my true north is being a soccer player because my parents said so, that's not your true north. You need to re-audit your life and figure out what you want to do, especially if it's really burning you out and you don't enjoy it and you don't look forward to it. So I think understanding where it fits in that puzzle of like, is this the in-between that I struggle through to get to where I want to go in this place that I'm really passionate about and that I really care about, and that if I'm not aligned with that true north, I'll find myself feeling like misdirected and miserable and overwhelmed? Or are you just pursuing this thing for no reason, in which case, why are you doing it if you hate it? And stop, because it's also hard, and why would you continue?
Yeah, I find myself circling back to the treadmill reference. And I don't know if it's because I'm also a visual learner, but when you talk about doing things you don't like for the betterment of your true north, and on a sports team, the championship, right? To give it to our athletic listeners, no one wants to sprint hills. No one wants to run ladders. No one wants to do the fitness piece. I shouldn't say no one. 99% of the people do not want to do that. But it's necessary in order to give yourself the best chance at having the best practice, to then win the next game, to then make it to the championship, right? You could set your life up like that, is what I'm hearing from you. What I'm curious about, and I don't want to skip over this point because I think it's perfect how you said it, is, are you doing this because you like it, or are you doing it because person X, Y, or Z says you're good at it and they like watching you do it, or they find joy through you doing it, or it's just something I've done forever, why the heck not? How do we figure out if we're doing something because we like it or because we're told we like it?
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways. The exercise we did in the class was like asking yourself, why? Like, I host a podcast. Why? Because I care about Gen Z mental health, and it's a way to make an impact before I go to college and get my degree and then go to grad school and do research and study these things that hopefully help young people. Why? Because I felt so out of control and isolated in my experience. And I feel incredibly empathetic for people going through that. And I also really enjoy these topics. Why? Because it's an incredibly painful experience that people don't necessarily have to go through, that we understand how to help them through. It's like, what is the core? And just continuing to ask yourself why until there's nowhere further. That can be really helpful. I think also paying attention to what you enjoy and what comes easily to you. And this is another Angela Duckworth grit principle that she taught us in her class, which is to do what's fun, do what's easy, do what you enjoy, do what energizes you. What you described of like doing the sprints on the treadmill to train for that long-term thing, that disconnect between what I should do and what I want to do and what I decide to do based on what's in my best future interest. That's the concept of self-control. And we can build more self-control, but in general, motivation and self-control are not the most effective things to build our life upon. It's much more effective to build your life upon like your true sense of purpose and things you enjoy and people you want to be around and things you look forward to than white knuckling your way through every hard thing in every moment just because. It's also miserable. That's why I'm not a professional athlete, because I would hate it and there would be no reason to do it and I would be deeply depressed. So I think that's a helpful way to approach it. And also understanding, and this was also from like DBT, as well as you always have a choice. Like you just have to be willing to accept the consequences. So if you're like, well, I've been doing this sport for 12 years and here's all the reasons and all these people are relying on, why? Like these guidelines that we give ourselves and the things that we say we should do, whether it's like who we surround ourselves with or how we spend our time or where we live or the goals we set, like why? You can literally do anything as long as you're willing to accept the consequences. And I think it's really hard once you're already doing that thing. Like we avoid energy consumption. We like to conserve our energy as much as possible. We don't like to sprint on the treadmill a lot. It's a lot easier to continue doing that thing or stay in that relationship or stay in your lane rather than pivot and adjust and try that new hard thing. We prefer to know what to expect, even if it's painful and overwhelming and uncomfortable, then navigate the uncertainty of it might be painful and overwhelming and uncomfortable. And so knowing that is like a weakness as humans and that we still can change our lane despite that.
Yeah, I've heard it referenced as it's easier to stay stuck in the suck than it is to actually make a change, for simplified terms. I hear you, and I believe in what you're saying. I'm kind of going to play the critic here and say, hey, Sadie, I hear you. I know I have a choice, but it doesn't feel like it. I can't afford to, whether it's monetarily or I don't have enough time to go help and get therapy to figure out who I really am, what I really want. I just have to go to school. I have to get my degree. I have to find a job so that way I can support myself. Like it's impossible for me to do what you're saying. What would you say to that person?
Well, I think it's a lot of different things that you're trying to do at one time, which is therapy and go on a career and go to college and support. So breaking it down to like one aspect of like, I can't. So like, if you pick one of those of like, I can't do it, what would be the point that you're starting in that you're hearing me say, you could do this thing if you wanted to?
Yeah, so just breaking into bite-sized pieces is what you would tell them. Don't try to tackle everything at once.
Yeah, but also if you like are hearing this and you're like, well, I can't do that for all of these reasons, but like we'll break it down to the bite-sized piece of like, I have to go to college and get this career so I can support myself. Okay. Yes, it's important for many of us to get a degree in higher education, and you might not like that part of the process, but that's not the end goal. It's in service of this higher goal. And how can you remind yourself and align with that higher goal as much as possible? Like taking classes that are related to the things you're interested in, taking classes with people you enjoy, and continuing to do clubs and a sport that continues to motivate and energize you. And then I think also like the asking yourself why question of I have to go to college to get this job. There are so many different lanes you could go. And in 2026, almost every different direction you could choose to go in, if you apply yourself, you can find a well-paying job in, and support yourself. It might be like I'm doing this in between in service of this larger long-term goal. And I think really just trying to align with that as much as possible. And again, like, you don't have to. Like, I wouldn't have done any of the things that I'm describing when I was struggling, but I was willing to accept the consequences. And so you don't have to do anything differently or go to therapy or change your career. Okay, you might not feel aligned with your purpose, and you might struggle with your mental health, and you might feel isolated and alone, and like nothing will ever change. That's fine. It's your life. You get to make those decisions. You just have to be willing to accept the consequences, and understand the implications of them. But I think that's also really empowering to know, like, I can do whatever I want to. And I don't want to be a professional athlete, so I absolutely do not work out a crazy amount and do the treadmill sprints all the time. And I'm accepting the consequences. I didn't play in the Super Bowl, and that's okay.
Yeah, before I move into something you said later, I don't want to just gloss over this. It costs nothing to ask yourself why. I think we often forget that. Again, I was being hypothetical and throwing 1,000 things at you at once because I wanted to get a point across. And thankfully, you picked up what I was putting down and got the point across that I was hoping. So thank you for that. You could just always ask why. One of my therapists said, just be the annoying 3-year-old. Hey, why does this work? Well, why does that make it work? Well, why does that make that? Like, it sounds redundant, but the more you do that, the more clear your vision becomes of what you actually want versus what you think you want. And I know that sounds a little tricky, but I had to do this at one point, and I didn't even realize I was doing it until, again, my therapist told me I was to continue to be the annoying 3-year-old. Around COVID as well, around the pandemic, was spending a lot more time with myself and lost my sport. And it turns out I suffer from athletic identity, or I did at the time. That was pretty much all I based my life on. The only friends I had were around my sport. Like, it was just soccer for me. That's all I did since I was 4 years old. My two older brothers, my dad, like my whole family. Then I lost that, and I lost my sense of self. And it's the first time I really asked myself, why? Like, why has soccer been everything to you? What is that filling your cup with? And I was able to do some deeper work, and then honestly start this platform by saying soccer's provided me with an opportunity to lead. I've been a leader on every team I'm on. Okay, well, why is leading important to you? Well, it allows me to continue to grow as a person and meet new people. Okay, why is that important to you? And I couldn't name that the first time I sat down and asked why. I was just frustrated staring at a blank piece of paper, like, why are you even asking yourself why, you piece of poop? Like, to be honest, that's where I was at. But again, it's that moment of realization that when you're ready, you can start to answer those questions. For you, you mentioned that you weren't necessarily ready to do it when you were a young adult, a teenager. That moment of realization, did you have a moment of realization, I guess? Or was it something that you, like you said, your parents were just like, this is it. This is what you're going to have to do. Figure it out.
Realization of like that
that things could get better.
There wasn't. I was backed into a corner, and I think this is what's really interesting about adolescent mental health is that you aren't the one that's in the driver's seat taking yourself to therapy. Like, you might find yourself seeing a therapist, but you weren't the one that went to therapy because you were the one that wanted to go and found the blah, 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 blah. Like, a lot of the times others are doing that for you. And so you can go through the motions, but not be emotionally invested or hopeful about the outcome or any of that. And so I really didn't have like a turning point of like, now I'm going to invest in myself. And this is the rock bottom where things cannot get any worse. And I'm going to be on the up and up from here. there was that like choice point that I look back on of like, you have to accept the wisdom in this process and you have to let us in. And that very slight cultivation of self-love and hope for the future. But I wouldn't say that that was like a dramatic 180 shift. It was like, I'm just slightly ever so open to something maybe being different in the future. And then slowly but surely, over days and weeks and months, making changes and then seeing that momentum and continuing to maintain that progress. But there definitely wasn't like that singular moment of where everything magically changed.
Yeah, I think you put that so wonderfully. I think it goes beyond mental health. When you're a child, your life is shaped so much by the decisions of your parents and where they decide to take you. Or do you tag along to X, Y, and Z if you're a younger sibling? Or do you take your younger sibling if you're an older sibling? Like, I just think that the parent's role is so crucial, and it becomes easy to, in therapy or just in life, blame your parents. Right?
Yeah, I blamed them for all my mental health problems. I was like, you guys raised me, so this must be your fault that my brain is working this way. So much anger, so much blame, so much resentment, no trust, no ability to ask for help. It's really, really easy to do that. And I think the like biopsychosocial theory was really helpful for me to understand that like it's partially like how we are wired. Like I feel my emotions more intensely, which makes everything just like harder to navigate. I was raised by my parents, and some of how I was raised, just like some of how everyone was raised, will impact their mental health. And then there's also like how we approach and cope with the situation. And I can go home now and cope through the challenges that arise and navigate a conflict effectively. I couldn't have done that 10 years ago because I didn't have the coping skills and the emotional bandwidth or any of these other things that we can bring to the table to help navigate a situation. So I think understanding all of those pieces can kind of be a part of the puzzle, but it is really easy to be like, this is just how I'm wired, nothing's ever going to change, or this is someone else's fault and it's not on me to try and fix it. And there's also that piece of how am I going to approach this situation? How am I going to better equip myself to navigate this effectively?
Yeah, where I think I want to go with this is read you a piece of work by Chris Williamson. He does a lot of work in the, I guess, just the human being space, just what it means to be human. And it kind of points to this ideology that we're discussing of blaming your parents for everything. So if that's okay with you, I'd like to read you this short passage and then get your thoughts on it and go from there. So he writes, "We love blaming our parents. It's practically a rite of passage in modern psychology. But there's a double standard buried in the trend. We attribute what's broken in us to our upbringing, while claiming what's strong as ours alone. This is the parental attribution error. Like the fundamental attribution error, where we blame others' actions on their character but excuse our own by pointing out the circumstance. This is a skewed way of assigning credit and blame. We externalize the bad, internalize the good. You're so quick to blame, so slow to credit. You say you're anxiously attached because no one held you when you needed it, but isn't your ability to be alone with your emotions and to endure discomfort quietly also forged in that same crucible? You blame your parents for pushing too hard in school, convinced it made you a perfectionist and neurotic. But when was the last time you acknowledged that that same pressure gave you ambition, discipline, and drive? You point to a childhood where mistakes weren't tolerated as the reason you fear failure, but what about your meticulousness, your standards, your refusal to phone it in? You complain that no one ever asked what you wanted growing up. But could that also be why you're so tuned in to what everyone else needs? You say your low self-worth comes from never being praised, but isn't that the same fuel that makes you outwork everyone else around you? You trace your conflict avoidance back to all the shouting at home, but isn't that also where your talent for de-escalation and emotional radar came from? You chalk your hyper-independence to not being able to trust anyone, but isn't that also what made you capable, adaptable, and calm under pressure? You say you're emotionally guarded because no one took your feelings seriously, but isn't that also why you're steady when the people around you fall apart? You've labeled yourself as a people pleaser because you had to keep the peace at home, but maybe that's also why your social fluency and emotional intelligence were born. You blame your poor boundaries on your parents who didn't respect yours, but isn't that why you're so careful not to cross anyone else's? You say your nervous system never relaxes because your home was unpredictable, but isn't that why you're also perceptive, quick thinking, and never caught off guard? The traits you're most ashamed of are often just the dark side of something light. Your sharp edges didn't appear out of nowhere. They're often the byproduct of something useful, a strength turned up too high, or a gift handled without guidance. Think about a sword, powerful, precise, designed to cut through resistance. But if it's a double-edged sword, and most strengths are, then sometimes it nicks you on the backswing. That doesn't mean you throw the sword away. It means you learn how to hold it properly. Most traits worth having come with risk. The truth is messier than a single cause. Every trait is entangled. Wounds and gifts often share the same root. The self-reliance you're proud of might come from the same childhood where you couldn't rely on anyone else. The confidence you carry may have started as a defense against ever feeling small or dismissed again. Even your drive to succeed might be rooted in the fear of not being good enough. But this perspective requires maturity. It's simpler to cast yourself as the victim of bad parenting than to reckon with a complicated inheritance. It's easier to say they hurt me than to admit they shaped me in ways I'm still figuring out. The cultural narrative rewards blaming your parents more than it does understanding them. Therapy oftentimes turns them into villains. Instagram makes them punchlines, but how often do you thank them in the same breath you critique them? None of this excuses abuse, neglect, or dysfunction, but it does ask you for honesty. If you're going to draw a straight line from your childhood to your flaws, you should trace that same lineage to your strengths. If you can't let your parents take credit for what's right with you, maybe you shouldn't be so quick to make them the villains for what's wrong.
A lot of thoughts.
And I have a lot of time that I need to catch my breath, so I would love to hear them.
The first is that if you're blaming external circumstances for your failures and internal ones for your successes, good job. Keep doing it. It's incredibly effective and from a psychology perspective, very adaptive. We know that people that are depressed are more likely to, when something goes wrong, they say, this is my fault. I'm a bad person. This will happen again in every situation. And when something good happens, they'll say that was because of the situation. Something went right. It probably won't happen again. It's this phenomenon called learned helplessness. And we also have learned optimism. And so when we look at optimists and pessimists and people that are depressed or not depressed, the best thing you can do when you navigate situations in life is to attribute bad things to the external, to your circumstances, saying this was specific to this situation. This was related to something that happened not because of me, and that it can change in the future. And when something good happens, this happened because I worked hard and I am persistent and will continue to happen in the future. So in general, as a rule of thumb of how we approach life, that tends to be a great way to do so. And there's a lot of research on that. I think the dialectic piece is true, and at the core of DBT, that two seemingly opposing things can be true at the same time. We can go through really challenging experiences in childhood, and they can also maybe give us some strengths in adulthood. Like both of those things seem to be really opposite of each other, but can also be true. There's also the DBT concept of a kernel of truth. There's a kernel of truth in everyone's lived experience. Somewhere in the middle is kind of what actually happens. And I think for me, what's most helpful in navigating any challenging situation is validation being the first point that you start at. I'm a big fan of a pity party. I'm a big fan of complaining. I'm a big fan of feeling what it is that I'm going through. If you tell me to just accept all these negative things because there's two sides to every story and you should be positive about it, I will then feel like, okay, well, why wasn't I approaching it that way in the first place? And like, I must be wrong for not having that insight. And wow, that is so rude of me to blame these other people. And wow, I'm even a worse person now. Like, that's just not effective in the way that I approach things. Some people love the tough love, like, here's the truth, here's how it is, change your mindset. I don't like that. And so for me, I find it helpful to be like, okay, this was a really painful and hard experience, and this is really challenging, and this didn't go the way I wanted it to go, and it should have been better, and I deserved better, and I wish the outcome was different. And then once you've fully sat with that and accepted that, and that is okay to feel, and that's valid, and there's no shame associated with that, and we just get to experience that because it sucks and that's hard, and it makes sense that you're upset about it. And then being able to work through, okay, what do I want to do next? And how do I want to approach these situations in the future? And how can I invest in this relationship and be grateful to others, et cetera, whatever it is you want to do at that next turning point. But that's my initial reactions, which is that in general, the mindset that he outlines is actually exactly what you should do according to positive psychology. If you're doing it, keep doing it because it's very good for your mental health. Not to say we don't accept accountability. Like, we absolutely have to accept accountability. But in general, that way of attributing good and negative things is good for your mental health while also taking responsibility when you're responsible. I think that the dialectic and kernel of truth is there, and like the parent versus kid thing. And that I think it's at least hard for me to approach that without initially starting with feeling the emotion and validating that at its very core level. And I also do see a lot of like discourse online of like cutting off parents and the like Mel Robbins New York Times article, and this of like, we're over Instagramming and hating parents. At the end of the day, like, you don't have to do anything, and it's not like you should do anything. It's your relationship. You're just as much a participant in it as your parents are, and you get to decide how to move forward. And so if that means not doing all those amazing gratitude things on that list, that's totally fine. Again, you just have to accept the consequences. That they won't be like, wow, that is so nice that you said that, now our relationship is better. Like, okay, great. And so I think understanding that, like, yes, there is a power imbalance, but as an adult, you have complete agency in this situation, and you get to decide how to engage in that relationship, especially if it's not the healthiest.
Yeah, you articulate that so well. I just want to throw that out there again, that you put to words what a lot of us are thinking. So I really appreciate that. One thing I want to hit on here before we kind of bring this episode to a close, because if I don't, we could be here for another 6 hours.
I can ramble.
Hey, no, it's not rambling. It's very, very helpful. And honestly, I think our audience might enjoy it. But again, we're just going to keep it short-ish, sweet, and let them tune over to She Persisted if they love what you're doing. But
200 episodes. You can listen to me here talking a lot.
You could go a whole year. Here we go.
Yeah.
We could just keep it on replay. But anyways, back to the little passage there. The line that strikes me the most is when he talks about the double-edged sword. That's what I think is the pinnacle of his entire passage, in my opinion. That's what I take away. He says, you don't throw away the sword, you just learn how to use it. I know what that means to me, Sadie. I want to know what that means to you.
Yeah, I think I struggle with a lot of the direct lines he's drawing here, and I don't know if that's like the scientist in me that like correlation is not causation, and these actually are like two really fundamentally different like aspects of self. And actually a lot of the traits he's describing are really influenced by childhood. And these other ones are actually like really dependent on like our social environments and the choices we make. And so I think it's a little too much. I'm going to need to see a research article on these claims that are being made. But I do think that in general, trying to look at all sides of the situation, and especially in emotionally challenging situations, giving yourself a lot of grace and validation, because it's hard to do that, and it's hard to look at other people's perspective when you're really emotionally invested, and understanding that blind spot of like, this is going to be hard and uncomfortable, and I probably won't respond well and logically because this is like a tough sore spot. But yeah, I do think that, again, you have the choice to approach the situation however you want to. You can throw away the sword. You just have to accept the consequences. You can choose to use the tool and accept the consequences. I don't care. It's your life. Again, you can do whatever you want to. You can cut off the relationship. You can take credit for all the good and blame for all the bad. again, you just have to accept the consequences and the implications on your life. And I think that's the accountability piece. Like, yeah, we talked about the attribution, but again, you're making the decision, you're taking action, and you can do whatever you want. You can think about it however you want to, you can approach it however you want to. You just have to accept the consequences, but you always have a choice. And I think that's what we lose when we struggle with our mental health in a severe way, is it feels like you don't have a choice in how you feel and what your life looks like and what's going to happen in the future. A lot of that gets stripped from you and you're in survival mode. And so really understanding, even when I'm having a panic attack or suicidally depressed or feeling hopeless and that there's nowhere to turn and everywhere is horrible, like, you still have a choice. You can always make things worse. You can always make things better. And I chose to make things worse for a long time. And I accepted the consequences. And I'm lucky that it turned around and that I had people that cared about me that kept me going. But you don't have to look at the situation differently or move forward or make some magical, amazing shift. You can make things worse, and that is okay. And that's the beauty of life. And I think that's one thing that I feel strongly that is incredibly important when it comes to mental health, is just feeling like you have control, and the belief that if I take action, my action will have a meaningful result. And so whenever you can remind yourself of that, like, I can make things worse, and I can have a pity party, and I can start a giant argument, and I can call my parents and be like, here's all the reasons you suck. Like, you still have that choice. And even if you choose not to, that's still a choice. Like, you did that. You made that choice to be more effective in that situation. You didn't have to do that. You could call them and be like, you suck, and here's all the reasons according to this Instagram post. So, like, celebrating those positive choices, understanding that, again, you always have that option. And I think that gives people a lot more hope and empowerment when it comes to mental health, especially.
Before I tell you what the sword means to me, I just want to make clear that that's on his personal blog. I don't know if it's backed by any scientific claims. I just picture him late at night typing on his computer. I mean, I love this passage. It's just so fascinating because it can go in so many different directions for whoever it is. But the sword is very similar to me as it is to you. I see it as like when you're younger, you're just going where the sword is pointed, right? You're the soldier. If the person holding the sword points it that way, you run that way. You don't have a choice. As the adult, you're the one holding the sword now. There might not be anyone behind you to run that direction, but whatever direction you point it is where you're going to go. If you want to put it back in your shield, or in your sheath rather, you could put it there and let it rest. If you want to swing it and accept, like you said, the consequence of maybe nicking yourself or hitting something you don't want to, okay, but you chose to swing it. It's your actions that lead to your results, is what that means to me. And again, could mean something wildly different to the listener. I think that's the beauty of his work, but I really appreciate your perspective, and I think it's important to know that other people feel the way that you feel as well on the topic, and that they're not alone, and that if they are going through it and are saying, well, all I do is keep making things worse. Oh, okay, like, it's okay. We can still get through this. It might get more worse before it gets better. It might take a long time, but you're living proof that once you make that decision, that choice to switch the consequences to a more positive tone, that it can work out. So I'm very happy that you decided to join us today. I mean, this has been such an unreal conversation. I hope that our listeners have gotten just as much out of it as I have. And I did, however, want to ask you the final question that we ask just about every guest here on the Make Mental podcast. Sadie, are you ready? Okay, if there was one person in the entire world who could use a hug from you right now, who would you give it to and why?
The first thing that came to mind was my dog.
Okay, tell us why.
It's not a person. I miss her, and I'm the only one in my family. We have 2 dogs, and one of them is like our old dog. We've had her for like 9 years. She's the fan favorite. The other one is like super hyper, objectively cuter, but she's like a little rascal little sister, likes to bug the other dog. And I'm the only one whose favorite is Piper, who's like the little one that gets on everyone's nerves. So she probably needs a hug from me. She's probably getting the like negative end of the favoritism. They take great care of her. They love her. But she forgets who I am every time I go home. So, but I tell myself that she needs my love. Again, to take credit for the good things. She needs me. I'm like keeping her self-esteem up.
No, I think she knows who
hug.
you are. I think dogs have a good.
Yeah, she's the best.
I mean, that could be a whole podcast episode in itself. the thought process behind why you like that dog a lot. Like I don't want to go on a tangent.
I could tell you, I could give like my guess is that I was like super depressed when we had the other dog, and I like didn't like anyone or care about anything, so there wasn't like that like connection. And then we got the other one after treatment, and she was like
interesting.
Like I was more there when she was growing up, and I like trained her, and she is cuter objectively. So I think it's different seasons of life.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Interesting. Well, like I said, we could go on forever and ever and keep this wheel spinning, which I would love to. However, we all have lives to return to. So if you enjoyed or got anything from Sadie on this episode, please tune over to her on the She Persisted podcast. I'm sure you just look it up. Trust me, it's not that hard. You just look it up and you find her, I promise.
And if you can't tell me, because that means something's not working, so send me an email.
Yeah. Or send me one and I'll get it to her if you can't even find an email for some reason. But I'm very fortunate to have stumbled across her platform. I learn a lot from her, continue to learn a lot from her. So like I said, I hope you do as well. Share this with someone you love, someone who might need it, and remember that you are beautiful and you are worth it.
You know, one thing I've learned while running Make Mental is that the conversations are the easy part. It's creating content and getting it out there that takes the most time and energy. That's why I started working with C3 Socials, and honestly, they have been a lifesaver. They've been running my Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube for the past few months, and in just the last 90 days, over 350,000 people have visited my Instagram alone. But the numbers aren't even the best part. It is the time and energy that I've gotten back. Chandler, the owner, is super personable and always available. Seriously, it's crazy how hands-on she is. So if you're trying to grow your brand or just free up some headspace while getting results, check out C3 Socials. Tell them Make Mental sent you, because they've helped me tremendously and I cannot recommend them enough.